Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Unset Hours. I know many of you listen to these stories to relax and slowly fall asleep. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from tonight. If you enjoy these stories, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Now, get comfortable, take a deep breath, and let's begin. I grew up in Ohio during the 1970s, back when kids were expected to disappear outside for hours at a time and only come home when the sun went down. My closest friend growing up was a kid named Joe. We were inseparable. Joe lived on a working farm at the edge of town, and his family owned land that backed right up against a massive stretch of forest. It wasn't just a small patch of trees either. It went on for miles, thick and wild, with creeks, hills, and places where you could walk for hours and never see another person. My parents would drop me off at Joe's place early in the morning on weekends, sometimes with a sleeping bag and a backpack, and we'd vanish into those woods. We spent entire weekends out there, only coming back into town for school during the week. Those woods were our world. We pretended we were explorers or frontiersmen surviving on our own. We built shelters out of fallen branches, tried to make traps even though we never really caught anything, and practiced starting fires by rubbing sticks together. Most of the time we failed, but that didn't matter. We felt independent and untouchable. As we got older, that sense of adventure never really went away. When we reached high school, a movie came out called Stand By Me, and like a lot of kids our age, it made a huge impression on us. The idea of walking along railroad tracks through the countryside, discovering places no one else went, felt like exactly the kind of thing we were already doing, just taken to the next level. So we decided to do our own version of it. We weren't looking for a body or anything dramatic like that. We just wanted to walk the tracks, find rivers and bridges to fish from, and camp somewhere nearby at night. We knew it was dangerous. We knew we were trespassing. But at that age, the danger only made it more exciting. Those trips turned out to be some of the best memories of my teenage years. We found beautiful rivers hidden away from roads and towns. We discovered old bridges that looked like no one had stood on them in years. We fished, talked, laughed, and when trains came through, we hid and watched them thunder past. At night, we camped just far enough from the tracks to stay hidden and built small fires that wouldn't be seen. Nothing bad ever happened. Not once. It felt like we had found a secret world that belonged only to us. Because nothing ever went wrong, we did it again and again. Each trip felt peaceful and almost perfect. Looking back now, it seems almost impossible that we could wander around like that without a single problem. After high school, life did what it always does. Joe and I went our separate ways. We both left our hometown, started adult lives, and took on responsibilities that didn't leave much room for wandering the woods. Even so, we stayed in touch. We made an effort to see each other when we could, coordinating visits whenever we happened to be back home at the same time. One summer in the mid-1990s, it worked out that we were both in town for about a week. During the day, we did the usual family stuff, but at night we either went out for drinks or sat around a fire in Joe's yard, talking about the old days. As often happens, nostalgia and alcohol mixed together until our memories started to feel closer than they really were. One night, our old Stand By Me trips came up. We laughed about how fearless we'd been, how stupid some of it probably was. And then, half joking and half serious, one of us suggested we do it again. Just once. Walk the rails for a day, camp one night, and head home in the morning. The idea took hold almost immediately. By the next day, we were planning it like it was the most natural thing in the world. My wife agreed to drop us off at our old starting spot just outside town. She thought the whole thing was ridiculous and made sure to tell us so, but she went along with it anyway. When she drove away and we were standing there alone by the tracks, it felt surreal. We were older now, slower, carrying more weight both physically and mentally. But for a moment, It felt like nothing had changed. Joe suggested that instead of taking the route we always used, we should walk in the opposite direction, just to mix things up. We knew the area well enough, had a map, and figured there was no real risk. I shrugged and agreed, and we set off. The day passed without incident. It was fun, but there was also a quiet sadness to it, the kind that comes from realizing you can't truly go back to who you once were. We found a bridge, sat on the edge, shared a joint, and talked. We hadn't brought fishing gear this time, just some canned food and basic supplies. As evening approached, we started looking for a place to camp. We chose a spot where the forest grew thick on both sides of the tracks. The trees closed in so tightly that it felt like walking through a tunnel. It was secluded, quiet, and seemed perfect. We had brought small hammocks to sleep in, but before setting them up, we decided to scout the area. This was something we had always done when we were younger. We wanted to make sure there wasn't a house nearby, that we weren't accidentally setting up camp on someone's property. We walked about 100 feet into the woods and up a small hill. Our plan was simple. If we didn't see anything from the top, we'd go back and settle in for the night. When we reached the top, we noticed a shape in the distance. Down below, deeper in the woods, was a building. It was far enough away that it was hard to see clearly, maybe 100 yards or so, and partially hidden by trees. We stopped and talked it over. Our first thought was that it might be a sugar shack or some old utility building. There was no visible road leading to it, no lights, no movement. Everything was silent. Still, curiosity got the better of us, and we decided to move a little closer just to be sure. As we made our way down the hill slowly, the shape became clearer. It wasn't a small shed at all. It was a church. It looked ancient and abandoned. The wood was darkened almost black from years of rot and moss. The structure sagged in places like it might collapse if pushed too hard. A cross still stood on the roof, just as weathered as the rest of the building. The windows were empty, no glass left, and there were no doors, only open frames. We got close enough to peer inside. Rows of pews were still in place, and there was a raised area at the front where a preacher would stand. The air felt heavy. Neither of us wanted to go inside. There were no signs of recent use, no footprints, no clear paths, nothing to suggest anyone had been there in years. We didn't linger. We turned around and headed back up the hill toward our chosen campsite. Having that hill between us and the church made us feel a little better, but neither of us could fully shake the unease. We told ourselves it was just the natural creepiness of finding an old church in the middle of the woods. By the time we set up our hammocks, dusk had settled in. We figured we'd get some sleep and move on early in the morning. As night fell completely, we lay there talking quietly, reminiscing when we heard something. At first it was faint, barely noticeable. Joe asked if I heard it too. I did. It sounded like singing. We froze, listening. It wasn't getting louder, but it was steady and unmistakable. We slid out of our hammocks and crouched low, straining to hear. After a minute, we decided to move back up the hill to see where it was coming from. We moved carefully, quietly, relying on instincts we hadn't used in years. The moon provided just enough light to keep us from walking into trees, but everything else was swallowed by darkness. We didn't use flashlights. We didn't speak. When we reached the top of the hill, we saw light flickering in the distance. It was coming from the church. The singing was coming from inside. The light looked like candlelight, unsteady and warm. We couldn't make out the words. It sounded like church music, but not in any language we recognized. We stayed where we were, watching, too stunned to do anything else. After a while, the singing stopped. Then a single male voice began to chant. It was deep and powerful, echoing through the woods. I couldn't understand a word he was saying, but the sound alone was enough to make my skin crawl. It reminded me of the kind of preacher you see in old biblical movies, commanding and intense. The voice would speak, then a group of voices would answer in song. This went on for several minutes, building in intensity. Finally, all the voices joined together in a long, sustained wail that grew louder and more disturbing with every second. It was overwhelming. I covered my ears. Then it stopped. Just as I was about to whisper that we needed to leave, Joe grabbed my shoulder and hissed that they were coming out. We watched as figures emerged from the church, walking in a line, holding hands. Some of them carried flashlights. They began singing again, and the beams of light started moving toward the hill. That was enough. We ran back to our campsite, grabbed whatever we could, and bolted for the tracks. We ran hard, then stopped and looked back. Lights were moving down the hill, shaking wildly as if the people holding them were running too. We kept moving, alternating between running and fast walking until the lights disappeared. Eventually, we reached a road and followed it to a small town, where we found a gas station and called my wife. Most people brushed it off as kids messing around, but I know what I heard. Those voices didn't sound like kids. I don't know who those people were, or what they were doing out there, but it remains the most unsettling experience I've ever had in the woods. Story 2. This happened when I was growing up, sometime around 2004 or 2005, when I was about 13 years old. I've thought about it a lot over the years, and even now it still makes my skin crawl when I replay it in my head. At the time, I didn't have the words to explain why it scared me so badly. I just knew that something felt deeply wrong. It happened in a rural area outside Uvalde, Texas, far enough from town that it felt completely cut off from everything else. Back then, Uvalde was even smaller than it is now. It wasn't a place you passed through on the way to anywhere important. You had to want to go there. My dad had a work connection with a guy who owned a massive piece of land down there. It was a dear lease, about 1,000 acres from what I remember, though as a kid that number just sounded impossibly huge. The owner had been complaining to my dad about wild hogs tearing up his property. In Texas, hog hunting is open season, especially back then because they destroy land so quickly. My dad decided to turn it into a surprise trip for me that summer. He told me we were going to spend a week down there hunting hogs together. Looking back, I know it wasn't just about hunting. It helped him professionally, sure, but it was also a chance for us to spend real time together. I was at that age where I was still close to my dad, but starting to drift into my own world, and I think he knew that. At the time, though, all I could think about was how long the drive was going to be. The trip from Dallas felt endless. It took about 7 hours in my dad's hardtop Jeep Wrangler, which I absolutely hated. It was uncomfortable, loud, and cramped. I remember shifting around in my seat, trying to find any position that didn't make my legs fall asleep. There wasn't much to look at outside the window either, just long stretches of road and dry land. I spent most of the drive either staring out the window or trying, once again, to beat Super Mario Land 2 on my Game Boy Pocket. I never did manage to beat that game as a kid, and that drive was no exception. By the time we finally arrived, most of the day was gone. It was early evening, and the sun was starting to dip lower in the sky. The owner had warned my dad that no one had leased the land yet that year, and that the cabin on the property might be in rough shape. He said it would probably be dusty and neglected. Honestly, I didn't care at all. I had been in scouts for a couple of years by then, and I spent a lot of my free time fishing or wandering around in the woods with friends. Sleeping rough didn't bother me. If anything, it made the whole thing feel more like an adventure. We unlocked the gate and drove down a long dirt path to the cabin. The place was worse than I expected, even with the warning. Dust and dirt covered everything. Flies buzzed around nonstop. It looked like raccoons or some other animals had gotten inside at some point, because there was animal droppings on the floor in a few places. The air felt stale, like it hadn't been opened up in a long time. Still, we cleaned up as best we could, swept some of the dirt aside, laid out our sleeping bags, and set up the cots. When it came time to sleep, something felt off almost immediately. I couldn't relax. No matter how I shifted or adjusted my sleeping bag, I felt tense. My chest felt tight and my thoughts kept racing. I remember staring into the darkness, listening to the sounds outside the cabin. I couldn't explain it, but I had this strong feeling that we weren't alone, like something was watching us from outside. I didn't say anything to my dad because I didn't want to sound scared or stupid. Eventually, I must have fallen asleep, but it wasn't deep or restful. It felt like I was only out for maybe an hour before morning came. When we woke up, it was around 7 in the morning. The sun was already bright and the heat was starting to build. We decided to scout the land first, looking for hog tracks and signs before setting up a blind. Summers in Texas are brutal, especially in the afternoon, so early morning was the best time to be out walking around. We spent about an hour moving through the land, scanning the ground and trees. Eventually, we came across a lightly wooded area where the ground was torn up in a way that was unmistakable. Hogs had been rooting there. We followed the signs deeper into the trees, moving slowly and quietly. I was focused on the ground, looking for more tracks, when my dad suddenly stopped me by putting his arm out in front of me. I looked up in the direction he was staring and saw a person standing about 50 yards away. Some of their body was blocked by trees, but there was no mistaking the shape of a human figure. My first thought was confusion. This was private land. The owner had told my dad no one else was there. The gate had been locked when we arrived. There was no reason for anyone else to be on the property. The person was wearing a bright red jacket that stood out sharply against the muted greens and browns of the woods. We started moving toward them slowly. My dad called out, saying something like, "Hey, we're hunters. This is private land." The figure didn't move, not even a little. We kept walking, and when we got closer, it became even stranger. The person was wearing what looked like a ski jacket and ski pants, thick, insulated clothing, in Texas, in the summer. By that point, it was close to 98 degrees outside. My dad called out again, still no response, no turning of the head, no shifting of weight, nothing. He told me to stay behind him, and I noticed him unsnap the clip on his pistol holster. We didn't have our rifles with us because we were just scouting. That alone made my heart start pounding harder. My dad moved cautiously, positioning himself to approach from the right side of the figure. He told me to stay where I was, about 20 yards back. I crouched down and watched, my mouth dry and my hands shaking. I could hear my dad talking as he moved, asking if the person was okay, asking if they could hear him. When he finally came around to the front, everything stopped. My dad stood up straight, staring. His face looked confused, almost blank. I called out to him, asking what was wrong. He answered back, his voice steady but strange, saying, "It's a mannequin." I stood up and walked toward them slowly. Up close, it was obvious. It wasn't a person at all. It was a mannequin dressed in winter clothing. What hit me immediately and still sticks with me to this day was how clean it was. The clothes looked brand new. There was no dust, no dirt, no sap, no bird droppings. Nothing to suggest it had been standing out there for more than a day, maybe 2 at most. I looked at my dad, and I saw the moment his expression changed. His eyes hardened, and I could tell he was worried. Almost instantly, that feeling from the night before came rushing back. The feeling of being watched. It was stronger this time, overwhelming. My chest felt tight, and I felt tears welling up in my eyes. I was terrified, more scared than I had ever been in my life up to that point. My dad leaned down and whispered that we were leaving right now. He grabbed my hand and drew his pistol. As we moved back the way we came, he scanned the woods constantly, turning his head in every direction. I was trying as hard as I could not to cry, but my body felt like it was vibrating with fear. Every sound made me flinch. The walk back felt endless, but later we figured it was probably only about 45 minutes. At the time, it felt like hours. When we finally reached the cabin, we didn't waste any time. We packed up everything as fast as we could and got out of there. We left that same day and started the long drive home. The ride back was quiet. Neither of us talked much. I remember my dad calling the owner of the land not long after we left. The guy was confused and said he'd check it out the next week when he was in the area. He also said he'd never had problems with trespassers, especially because the property was high fenced. My dad isn't normally a paranoid person, but between me being young and the possibility of someone else being on that land, he didn't want to take any chances. When we got home, we talked more about it. That's when he told me he hadn't been able to sleep that first night either. He had felt the same thing I did, that sense of being watched, but he hadn't said anything because he thought I was sleeping. The following week, his friend went out and searched the entire property. He never found any sign of anyone. No mannequin, no clothing, nothing at all. Even now, years later, thinking about it makes the hair on my arm stand up. I don't know what that mannequin was doing out there or who put it there. Part of me wonders if it was some kind of trap or warning, something meant to scare people off. Whatever it was, I'm just glad we left when we did. Whoever or whatever was out there, I'm thankful we never met them. This is one of those memories that still makes my chest tighten when I think about it. I don't know if this will come out short or if it will drag on longer than I expect, because I'm honestly just recalling things as they surface in my head. Even now, years later, thinking about it brings a real sense of stress and unease. This happened about 2 or 3 years ago. I've lived in southern West Virginia my entire life, and if you've never been here, it's hard to explain just how dominant the woods are. Mountains and forests surround you in every direction. At night, the darkness isn't just the absence of light, it's something heavy and complete. It feels like it presses in on you, and unless you've experienced it firsthand, it's almost impossible to imagine. That night, I was with a friend of mine. I'll call him Mark. Mark was over at my house like he had been plenty of times before. We were doing nothing out of the ordinary, just hanging out, watching UFC fights, playing Xbox, killing time the way you do when you don't have any real plans. Hours passed without us really noticing, and before we knew it, it was extremely late. We both hit that point where we were bored but not tired enough to sleep. At some point, we decided to go for a walk on a nearby trail to smoke a joint. This wasn't unusual for us. The trail wasn't very long, but it cut through dense woods on both sides. During the day, it was peaceful enough. At night, though, it felt completely different. The trees closed in, and the darkness swallowed everything beyond a few feet off the path. You couldn't see into the forest at all, only the narrow stretch of trail in front of you. We started walking, talking casually, not really thinking much of it. The night air was thick and still. After about 30 minutes, we reached roughly the halfway point of the trail. That's where we decided to stop. We stood there, packed the joint, and leaned against each other, just talking and trying to relax. That's when I noticed how alive the forest felt. There are always sounds in the woods. If you grow up around them, you get used to the background noise. Crickets, insects, distant animals moving through brush. But that night was different. The amount of activity was intense, especially for how late it was. By that point, it had to be well past 1 in the morning. There were noises everywhere, rustling, movement, sounds that felt too close for comfort. It was strange and unsettling, but not immediately alarming. Sometimes predators moving through an area can stir things up, and I tried to tell myself that's all it was. We finished smoking and started walking again, heading further down the trail. Almost immediately, everything stopped. The forest went completely silent. If you've never experienced that kind of silence in the woods, it's hard to put into words. It's unnatural. One second there's life everywhere, and the next it's like someone flipped a switch. No insects, no movement, nothing. The silence itself felt loud, and then there was a voice. It came out of nowhere. It didn't sound like any animal I'd ever heard. It wasn't clearly human either, at least not in a normal sense. It sounded mocking, shaky, uncertain. The best way I can describe it is that it reminded me of an old children's toy, the kind with a crackly speaker and a distorted robotic voice. It had that same broken, artificial quality to it, like something trying and failing to sound human. The moment we heard it, both of us knew something was wrong. There was no discussion, no hesitation. We turned and bolted down the trail in the opposite direction as fast as we could run. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it was going to burst out of my chest. I expected the sound to fade as we ran, or to grow louder if something was chasing us. But it didn't do either. No matter how far we ran, the voice stayed the same distance away. It didn't get closer, but it didn't fall behind us either. It stayed at the same volume, repeating over and over, never stopping, never changing. That was almost worse than if it had chased us. It felt like it was locked onto us somehow, like distance didn't matter. At that point, fear turned into something deeper. I've been scared before. Anyone has. But this was different. This felt like genuine danger. The kind of fear that makes your thoughts scatter and your body move on instinct alone. I remember thinking very clearly that we might not make it out of there. We ran until our legs burned and our lungs felt like they were on fire. I couldn't tell you how long it lasted. Time didn't feel real in that moment. All I knew was that the voice never stopped, never changed, and never let us feel like we were getting away from it. Eventually, we burst out of the trail, gasping for air, bent over, hands on our knees. I was shaking so badly I could barely stand upright. My throat felt tight, like I was on the verge of crying, even though I wasn't hurt. The terror just had nowhere else to go. We started moving again, heading toward the exit and the road. About 5 minutes from the end of the trail, when we thought the worst of it was behind us, it happened. A scream exploded from directly behind us. I don't mean a yell. I don't mean an animal call. This was a bone-shaking, heart-stopping scream that felt violent and hateful. It felt like it came from something enraged. The sound tore through the night and echoed through the woods. Birds erupted from the trees, wings flapping wildly as they fled their nests. My heart dropped into my stomach so hard I felt sick. I know what mountain lions sound like. I've heard them before. This was not an animal. It was not someone playing a prank. It wasn't a recording or a movie or anything distant. It was right there, close enough that it felt like it vibrated through my body. That scream was the most depraved, terrifying sound I have ever heard in my life. We didn't look back. We ran harder than we thought possible. Whatever exhaustion we felt before vanished instantly. Adrenaline took over completely. We sprinted toward the car, which was only about 5 minutes away from the trail exit. We must have covered that distance in a fraction of the time. When we finally reached the car, we threw ourselves inside and locked the doors immediately. I remember sitting there, hands shaking, trying to breathe normally. My ears were ringing. My heart wouldn't slow down. Mark looked just as shaken as I felt. Neither of us spoke for a long moment. There wasn't anything to say. We drove away as fast as we could without saying a word. I've only told this story to a handful of people, maybe 3 in total. Every single one brushed it off. Some said it was probably an animal. Others said we were high and let our imaginations run wild. A couple laughed it off completely. I stopped telling it after that. I've never been someone who goes looking for paranormal explanations. I don't actively believe in monsters or spirits or anything like that. I'm a rational person, but I know what I heard. I know how it made me feel. And I know that whatever was in those woods that night did not feel human. I know people will ask questions. They'll want to know what the voice was saying or if it sounded like words. The truth is, I don't remember. I don't even know if it was saying anything intelligible. At the time, it felt like a series of sounds strung together, fluctuating in pitch, almost like something experimenting with noise rather than language. Over the years, I think my mind has tried to block parts of it out. I can't recall specific details no matter how hard I try. All I remember is how wrong it felt, how the silence came first, how the voice stayed with us no matter how far we ran, and how that final scream felt like it came from something that wanted us to know it was there. Whatever was out there that night, I'm grateful we never saw it, and I'm even more grateful that we got away. I could probably list 1,000 moments from my childhood and teenage years when I felt scared or uneasy in the woods. Anyone who spends enough time out there knows the feeling. The forest is beautiful, peaceful even, but it can also make your imagination run wild. I grew up spending nearly all my free time outside, wandering through the trees alone or with friends. We never went too far when we were really young, but as we got older, you could actually see the proof of how our confidence grew. Old forts we had built, carvings in trees, little markers we left behind. Every year we pushed a little deeper, a little farther from home. Most of those memories are good ones. The woods were where I felt free, but this one experience stands apart from everything else. It wasn't the usual childhood paranoia or the fear you get when it starts getting dark and you know you should probably head home. This was different. This happened the summer after my friend and I had just graduated high school. It was that strange, in-between time in life where you feel like the world is wide open. No school, no real responsibilities yet. Just time. That summer felt endless. We spent most of it camping, hiking, and wandering the woods like we had done our whole lives, just with a little more freedom. One day, we decided we wanted to find a new place to camp, somewhere we hadn't been before. We packed our gear and started walking, heading deeper than usual. It felt like we walked for miles, though looking back it was probably less than that. Eventually, we came across a clearing that felt perfect. It was open enough to see around us, but still surrounded by thick trees. The area was unfamiliar to both of us, which only added to the excitement. We set up camp without much trouble, got the tent pitched, gathered wood, and got a fire going. The plan was simple. We'd wait for nightfall, smoke some weed, and play Monopoly by the fire. Just another relaxed night out in the woods. For some context, my friend and I were very different when it came to the outdoors. My buddy was a smaller guy, kind of goofy, always joking around, but he came from a family of foresters. Trees, plants, animal behavior, that was second nature to him. He had spent more time alone in the woods than anyone I knew. If I had spent 10,000 hours out there, he had probably spent 50,000. He was completely comfortable camping by himself and had done it plenty of times. I was different. I was taller, a bit sturdier, and as we got older, my interest shifted more towards sports and chasing girls. The woods became more of a social place for me, somewhere to hang out or have small parties. I never really lost my love for it, but I did lose some of my comfort being alone out there. Even as a teenager, I never had the nerve to camp by myself. There was always this nagging feeling that I was being watched when I was alone, something I chalked up to paranoia, but it never fully went away. That evening, though, everything felt normal. The sun had gone down and the fire was burning steadily. We were laughing, joking, just enjoying ourselves. My friend was sitting in this small folding chair he always brought with him, carefully loading up a makeshift bomb. I was crouched near the fire, breaking excess limbs off the logs we had gathered to keep the flames going. Then, without warning, a strong breeze cut through the clearing. I can't fully explain why it caught our attention so sharply. It might have been how sudden it was, or maybe it was just the way it felt against my skin. Whatever the reason, both of us froze at the exact same moment and looked at each other. The breeze lasted just long enough to knock the fire down to a weak, flickering flame. We sat completely still in near total darkness. Neither of us spoke. The clearing felt wrong all of a sudden, like the air itself had changed. That's when we heard it. Footsteps. They were coming from the other side of the fire, just beyond the reach of the light. At first, it sounded like someone running, then slowing to a walk, then running again. There was no mistaking it. These were footsteps on two legs, heavy enough to press into the underbrush, deliberate enough to sound controlled. It paced back and forth over the same spot, over and over again. My mind immediately tried to make sense of it. A deer. No, the rhythm was wrong. A bear, too light, too quick. A person, out here in the dark, miles from anywhere. Just as suddenly as it started, the movement stopped. There was a softer crunch, a shift in the leaves and sticks on the ground. I knew instantly what that sound meant. Whatever it was had crouched down. I was already crouched by the fire, frozen in place, and I realized with a sinking feeling that I was staring directly at it. I couldn't see anything beyond the firelight, just a wall of darkness where the footsteps had been. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. That's when my friend grabbed my shoulder and whispered my name. The moment he touched me, fear hit me like a wave. Up until then, I had been focused on the sounds, trying to rationalize them. I hadn't let myself feel afraid yet, but I could hear it in my friend's voice. He was scared, truly scared. This wasn't the calm, knowledgeable guy who knew every sound the forest could make. This was raw fear, and it triggered something deep inside me. I felt small, helpless. After what felt like an eternity, my friend slowly reached down and grabbed a handful of dry leaves. He dropped them onto the fire. For a split second, the flames disappeared completely, and we were plunged into absolute darkness. That moment felt endless. Then the fire flared back up, brighter than before. We both reacted instantly, throwing more leaves, brush, and sticks onto the fire. I added thicker logs, building it up as fast as I could. Neither of us took our eyes off that dark spot beyond the flames. We barely moved. We didn't speak. Time stretched. Minutes felt like hours. The thing on the other side of the fire didn't move. It just stayed there, crouched, watching. Whatever it was, it stayed completely silent. No breathing, no shifting, nothing. No animal behaves like that. Animals don't sit still and observe for that long. At some point, I became aware of a smell. It was strong and unpleasant, something like a paper mill. A sour, sulfuric scent, almost like spoiled eggs. It hung in the air, thick and unmistakable. We stayed like that for over an hour. My legs cramped from staying crouched. My back ached, but I didn't dare shift my weight. Finally, the leaves crunched again. Slowly, deliberately, the thing stood up and walked away. The footsteps faded into the forest, unhurried, as if it had decided it was done with us. Only after the sound disappeared did I realize something else. The smell was gone too. The rest of the night passed in a blur. We barely spoke, only whispering short remarks to each other. Neither of us went into the tent. I sat on the ground, leaning forward with my head resting on my hands, drifting in and out of shallow, restless sleep. My friend didn't sleep at all. Every time I opened my eyes, the fire was still burning, and he was still watching that spot. When morning finally came, we packed up without a word and started the long walk home. The forest looked the same as it always had, sunlight filtering through the trees, birds moving about like nothing had happened. But it felt different to me, like something had been revealed that I couldn't forget. To this day, we still talk about it. We try to make sense of what happened, but nothing ever fully explains it. What sticks with me the most is my friend's reaction. This was someone who had spent his life in those woods, someone who understood them better than anyone I knew. In the 7 or 8 years since that night, he has never camped out there alone again. And neither have I. I'm 17 years old and I live in Phoenix, Arizona. I've lived here long enough that the desert feels like home to me, and I've spent a lot of time exploring it. This incident happened about 6 months ago, and even now, thinking about it makes my stomach tight. I've had strange things happen to me outdoors before, but nothing comes close to what happened on this trip. It changed the way I think about being alone in remote places, and honestly, it still messes with my head. The trip took place in the Superstition Mountains, about an hour east of Phoenix. I'm not going to name the exact trail, and that's intentional. Anyone who spends time outdoors knows what happens when locations get posted online. A quiet trail turns into a crowded mess. People show up unprepared, trash piles up, and any sense of peace disappears. Whether it's a hiking trail, an abandoned mine, or a place with a creepy reputation, people flock to it for the wrong reasons. So I'll keep that part vague. The trail itself was an 8-mile loop that cut through a canyon. Nothing extreme, just a simple overnight backpacking trip. I'd done similar trips before and felt confident going in. Originally, I was supposed to go with a friend, but he canceled at the last minute. I considered backing out, but I already had my pack ready and my car loaded. I figured I'd just go solo. I'd camped alone before, and while it always made me a little uneasy, I didn't think much of it at the time. That decision turned out to be the first mistake. I didn't leave the house as early as I should have, and to make things worse, I had trouble navigating the rough Forest Service roads leading to the trailhead. Between wrong turns and slow driving, I didn't arrive until around 5:45 in the evening. For anyone who backpacks, especially in unfamiliar terrain, this is a huge mistake. You want plenty of daylight to hike and set up camp. I knew that, but at that point I was already there. I had planned to hike about 4 miles to my campsite. With the sun already dropping and the canyon swallowing light faster than expected, I adjusted my plan. I figured if I moved quickly, I could at least cover 2 or 3 miles before dark and find a place to camp wherever I ended up. It wasn't ideal, but I convinced myself it was manageable. That decision left me hiking alone on a darkening trail, miles from anyone else. There were about 15 miles of dirt road between me and the nearest people. Hiking alone at night is unsettling no matter where you are, but the superstitions have a reputation for a reason. The terrain is rough, the trails can disappear, and the mountains feel oppressive once the sun goes down. Eventually, it got so dark that the only thing I could see was whatever my headlamp was pointed at. Everything beyond that narrow beam was swallowed by darkness. That was when I decided I had to stop and set up camp, even if the spot wasn't great. Using only my headlamp and trying to move quickly, I ended up in a small clearing that was far from perfect. Still, I noticed some burned pieces of wood and the remains of a fire ring. It looked like people had camped there before, though not recently. That gave me some reassurance, even if it was false. My first priority was getting a fire going. Fire is comfort. Fire is light. Fire makes you feel less alone. I gathered what dry wood I could find nearby and managed to get a small fire going. Once that was done, I set up my tarp, laid out my sleeping gear, and finally cracked open a can of chili mac I'd brought for dinner. I remember feeling genuinely relieved. My camp emphasized a sense of security. My food was heating up, and the stress from the hike-in had started to fade. The uneasiness didn't disappear completely, but I chalked that up to camping alone in a remote place. To understand what happened next, it helps to picture the campsite. The clearing was small, surrounded by tall pine trees. The trail ran about 30 feet to my left. When you're sitting by a fire at night, the fire creates a circle of light, and everything beyond the edge of that circle is completely black. The contrast is intense. You can see clearly within the light, but beyond it, there's nothing. I was sitting on the ground near the fire, eating my dinner, when something happened that made my heart jump into my throat. A small rock, no bigger than a marble, landed inside my camp. At first, I just stared at it, confused. I was absolutely certain I was alone. There shouldn't have been anyone else on that trail. The sound was unmistakable, though. That rock had been thrown. I immediately turned on my headlamp and aimed it toward where I thought the rock came from. Because of the dense pine trees and brush, I could only see about 10 feet into the woods. Everything beyond that was darkness. For the next 15 minutes, I sat there in disbelief, scanning the tree line over and over again. I didn't move far from the fire. In hindsight, that fire gave me a false sense of safety, but at the time, it felt like my only anchor. Eventually, my brain started scrambling for explanations. Maybe I had kicked it without realizing. Maybe it fell from a tree. I wanted to believe anything other than the obvious. I stayed on high alert for the rest of the evening, but eventually forced myself to lie down. I didn't think I would sleep, but exhaustion caught up with me. When I woke up, it was still dark. I woke to the sound of leaves rustling. At first, it was so faint that I wondered if I was imagining it. Still half asleep, I listened as the sound grew quieter, as if whatever was making it was moving away. My heart was already racing, but I tried to stay calm. I reached for my handheld flashlight, which I knew I had placed right next to me when I went to sleep. It wasn't there. The more I searched around in the darkness, the more panic set in. I knew exactly where I had left it. I sat up inside my sleeping bag, my breath shallow and fast, and then ducked out from under my tarp. That's when I saw it. There was a faint light glowing in the woods, no more than 15 feet away. My flashlight was lying on the ground in a pile of leaves, beyond the edge of my campsite. This was one of the few moments in my life where I truly felt like my body might give out from fear. The flashlight that had been next to me a few hours earlier had been moved, deliberately, into the woods. There was no wind strong enough to carry it. No animal would pick it up and place it there. I shoved my feet into my boots as fast as I could, my hands shaking. I grabbed my knife and held it tightly, forcing myself to stay aware of my surroundings. My head was on a constant swivel, scanning the darkness. I had to make a decision. I could try to hike back to my car, which was about 3 miles away, in complete darkness without a flashlight. Or I could stay put and wait for daylight. I chose to stay. As terrifying as it was, I knew that whoever or whatever was out there would have a much bigger advantage if I tried to stumble through the dark without a light. That's when I started hearing footsteps. They were distant at first, barely audible but unmistakable. It sounded like someone walking casually through the woods, not sneaking, not running, just strolling. Sometimes the footsteps would fade until I couldn't hear them anymore. Then an hour later they would come back, just as calm and unhurried as before. This went on for what felt like forever, but was probably 3 or 4 hours. Each time the footsteps returned, they seemed closer. Eventually, they stopped about 7 feet from me. By then, my fire had burned down to almost nothing. I had run out of wood from my pile, and the flames were weak and flickering. When the footsteps stopped, the forest went completely silent again. I sat there, frozen, gripping my knife so tightly my hand cramped. I didn't move. I barely breathed. I stayed like that for 2 hours, praying that I wouldn't hear another sound. Finally, the sky began to lighten. The darkness thinned enough that I could see the outline of my campsite. There was no one there, nothing out of place besides my flashlight. As soon as I was sure I was alone, I packed up as fast as I could and speed-walked the 3 miles back to my car. When I reached the dirt road, I nearly sprinted the rest of the way. I unlocked my Subaru, jumped inside, and drove. I didn't slow down or stop until I had put at least 20 miles between me and those mountains. I stopped at a gas station in Apache Junction, partly to buy a Red Bull, but mostly because I needed to see another person. I needed proof that the world was normal. As I walked back to my car, I noticed something written in the dust on the back window. Sleep well. I don't scare easily, but that moment nearly broke me. A lot of weird things have happened to me over the years while exploring Arizona, but nothing compares to this. I don't know who was out there, but I am convinced it was a real person, someone deeply disturbed living in those mountains. Whatever it was, it knew I was alone. It knew exactly what it was doing. Do yourself a favor and stay as far away from the Superstition Mountains as you can. I've never told this story the way it actually happened. I've told safer versions, shorter versions, versions that end before the parts that still wake me up at night. But I'm older now and the distance hasn't softened anything. If anything, it's made the shape of it clearer. This happened when I was 12. My parents both worked overnight shifts at the hospital. That part wasn't unusual. I'd been staying home alone at night since I was 10. They trusted me. I was responsible, quiet, and anxious in the way adults mistake for maturity. I double-checked locks. I memorized emergency numbers. I knew how the house sounded when it was normal. That last part mattered more than I realized. It was winter, a real snowstorm, the kind that swallows sound and presses against the windows like a living thing. Snow piled up against the sides of the house, muffling the neighborhood until everything felt isolated and far away. Streetlights blurred into halos. Wind rattled the gutters in long, uneven breaths. I was in the living room, sitting cross-legged on the carpet, playing video games. The TV glow was the only light on. I wore a headset, but I always kept one ear slightly uncovered so I could hear the house. That was my rule. One ear for the game, one ear for reality. At the time, it felt smart. Looking back, it feels like instinct. Around 9:40 p.m., my game froze. The screen stuttered, the sound looped, and I groaned out loud, annoyed more than anything. I leaned forward to reset it. That's when I felt the thud. Not loud, not sharp. Just a dull, heavy impact that traveled up through the floor and into my legs, like something had dropped in the house below me. I froze, hands hovering over the controller. Old house, I told myself. Old furnace, pipes shifting because of the cold. My parents had said those things 100 times. Houses made noise, especially in winter. About a minute later, it happened again. Heavier this time. And this time, there was a sound that followed it. Low, grinding, unpleasant. Like gravel being pressed into concrete. I pulled the headset off completely. The house went quiet, not peaceful quiet, waiting quiet. I sat there, barely breathing, listening. Snow brushed against the windows. The heater hummed faintly, nothing else. Then I heard it, a soft crack. It came from the basement. Our basement wasn't finished. It was concrete and shadows and old boxes stacked in corners. There was a small ground-level window that faced the backyard, half buried by earth. My dad had mentioned once casually that it didn't lock properly. He said it like it wasn't important, like it was something he'd get around to eventually. I'd never thought about it until that moment. I stayed frozen, hoping the storm would give me an explanation I could accept. Wind, a branch, ice shifting. Then I heard glass crunch, slowly, carefully, not a shatter, not an accident, pressure. Wait, someone was breaking glass on purpose. My heart started to pound so hard I thought I might pass out. I reached for my phone with shaking hands and tried calling my parents. It rang. No answer. I tried again, straight to voicemail. I didn't call the police. I think about that a lot. People always ask why. The answer isn't logical, but it's honest. I was terrified of being wrong, terrified of overreacting, terrified of getting in trouble for calling emergency services over nothing. Adults had trained me well. Then I heard footsteps. They came from below, from the basement stairs, slow, measured, heavy boots on concrete. Every sound echoed upward through the house like the place itself was amplifying it for me. Each step felt deliberate, unhurried. Whoever was down there wasn't sneaking. They weren't panicking. They were moving like they had all the time in the world. I backed away from the living room without standing up, dragging myself across the carpet toward the hallway. My hands were numb. My mouth tasted metallic. The basement door creaked open. A shadow stretched across the hallway floor first. Then a man stepped into the light. He wore dark clothes, a jacket dusted with snow. Water dripped from his boots and darkened the carpet beneath him. His hair was damp, his face was calm. He looked at me, and he smiled, not wide, not manic, just soft. "Oh," he said quietly, "you're awake." The way he said it wasn't surprised in the way you'd expect. It sounded like mild disappointment, like he'd been hoping for something else. I ran. I don't remember standing up. I don't remember deciding where to go. My body chose for me. I sprinted into the kitchen, slammed the door shut, and shoved a chair under the handle with shaking hands. The chair scraped loudly across the tile, the sound impossibly loud in the quiet house. I backed away until my shoulders hit the counter. The doorknob turned. Slowly, carefully, he tested it once, twice. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said through the door. His voice was calm, practiced, the kind of tone adults use when they think they're being reassuring. "I just need you to stay quiet." That's when I screamed. It wasn't a word. It wasn't even a sound I recognized as mine. It tore out of my throat and filled the house. Almost immediately, sirens cut through the storm. Red and blue light flashed through the kitchen window, strobing across the walls. The doorknob stopped turning. I heard him sigh. Then his footsteps retreated unhurried back toward the basement. The police arrived fast. Too fast, I would later realize. They found the broken basement window. Snow tracked inside. Boot prints leading across the concrete floor. Marks on the kitchen door where the knob had pressed and twisted. But there were no footprints leaving the yard, not leading back into the snow. They chalked it up to the storm, to drift, to poor visibility. They told my parents I was lucky. They told me I was brave. They told me it was probably someone desperate, someone who panicked when they realized the house wasn't empty. We moved a few months later, a different neighborhood, a different house. I slept with my bedroom door locked for years. I checked basements obsessively. I learned every sound a new place made until it became familiar enough not to scare me. For a long time, I told myself I got lucky, that the timing worked out, that my scream scared him off, that the police just happened to be nearby. That belief lasted years, until last week. I was visiting my parents, sitting at their kitchen table, when a thought I'd never allowed myself to fully examine surfaced again. It had been there all along, buried under relief and distance. How did the police know to come so fast that night? I asked. My dad looked up from his coffee, confused. "We assumed you called them." I shook my head slowly. "I didn't." My mom frowned. "Then who did?" No one answered. The silence stretched, uncomfortable and heavy. A few days later, I requested the old police report. I didn't expect to find anything new. I just wanted to settle the question, to put the last loose thread to rest. There was a transcript attached. A 911 call logged at 9:43 p.m. before I screamed. Before the man spoke to me, before the siren. The caller didn't say much, just whispered. "He's inside the house. He thinks I don't see him. Please hurry." The dispatcher asked for a name. There was a pause. Then the caller said quietly, "I live here." The call ended. The number wasn't mine. It was a landline. Registered to the house. I felt cold wash over me. My parents never installed a phone in the basement. I went back to the house last night. It's abandoned now, condemned. The windows boarded up, the yard overgrown. Snow had melted and refrozen into dirty patches along the foundation. The basement window was still there, still broken. Inside, behind a false wall I'd never noticed as a child, I found a crawl space. It was just big enough for someone to live in. Inside were food wrappers, old canned goods, a blanket that had gone stiff with age, and a dusty phone still plugged into a dead jack. On the concrete wall, carved over and over in uneven, frantic handwriting, were the same words. "I called first." That's when the last piece fell into place. The man didn't break in that night. He was already living there. And when he stepped into the hallway and saw me, the reason he looked surprised wasn't because I was awake. It was because I wasn't alone. We weren't supposed to be out there. Not because it was illegal or fenced off or marked with one of those dramatic warnings people like to exaggerate after the fact. It was just one of those places locals talked about the same way they talked about bad weather or a dangerous intersection. Casual, certain, unquestioned. You don't hike that trail after 4. You don't camp by the creek. If you hear someone calling your name, you keep walking like you didn't. Everyone had a reason. None of them were ever the same, and somehow that made the rule feel older than any explanation. Like it had settled into the town long before any of us were born. My friend loved collecting those reasons. He treated them like trivia, like scary stories were something you could disarm by memorizing them. He had a way of stacking half-heard accounts and rumors in his head and pulling them out whenever he wanted to prove he wasn't afraid. "Dude," he said, tugging his pack higher on his shoulders, "it's not even a hard trail. It's basically a loop. We're in and out before dinner." I stood under the wooden kiosk at the trailhead and stared at the map, hoping something about it would suddenly feel reassuring if I looked long enough. Pine Hollow Loop, 3.8 miles. Elevation gain, 640 ft. Last water, Sage Creek seasonal. Below that were the standard warnings: ticks, sudden weather changes, black bears. A bright red sign reminded people to carry out their trash and stay on the trail. Normal, reasonable, the kind of things you see everywhere. Lower down, where the wood was scarred and darkened from years of weather, someone had carved into the kiosk with something sharp. The letters were uneven but deep, catching the sunlight. "Don't listen." I stared at it longer than I meant to. My friend noticed immediately. He followed my gaze and broke into a grin like he'd just been handed proof. "See," he said, "haunted." "It's graffiti," I said, though my voice didn't carry much conviction. "Graffiti with intent," he replied, dead serious. "Also, okay, yeah, I know how this sounds, but my cousin's friend swears he heard a woman crying out here last summer, like full-on sobbing, and when he went to check." "You don't go check," I said automatically, the words coming out before I'd thought about them. He spread his hands, pleased. "Exactly. That's the rule. That's what makes it creepy." He said it like that was the appeal, like the danger was a feature. The thing about him was that he wasn't reckless in the obvious ways. He got good grades without trying. He played sports. He usually had common sense, but he had this itch like he needed to walk straight into stories just to prove they couldn't hurt him. "You told your mom you were at my house?" I asked. He rolled his eyes. "Yes, and I told my dad we're getting fresh air." "Fresh air," I repeated. "With Lore," he said, already turning toward the trail. I followed because I always did, because backing out would have meant admitting that the warnings bothered me more than they should have. The gravel lot vanished behind the trees within a few steps. At first, everything felt normal. Pine needles crunching under our boots, sunlight breaking through the branches, a couple of squirrels darting across the trail like they were daring us to react. The path was wide, worn smooth by years of feet. We talked the way we always talked when we were trying to make the walk feel shorter. School. A teacher we both couldn't stand. His older brother's latest bad decision. He kept tapping the side pocket of his pack, pretending not to check his phone. "No service," I said, not looking at him. He made a face. "My dad's going to say this is nature curing my screen addiction." "Your dad texts you 8 times a day." "That's love." Then, inevitably, the conversation drifted back. "You ever notice," he said, "how every town has one spot like this?" "Because people get lost in woods," I said. "No, like a specific spot," he insisted. "A bridge, a creek, a trail everyone agrees is weird." "People like stories," I said. "We make patterns." He stopped walking and turned backward, walking a few steps facing me. "Okay, but then why is it always voices? Crying, someone yelling your name, a baby, same thing everywhere." "Because brains are stupid," I said. "We hear what we expect." He snapped his fingers. "Faces." "What?" "That's what people see out here. Faces, in the bark, in the leaves. like someone standing behind a tree, but when you look, it's just wood. A chill crawled up my spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. "Great," I said. "Love that." He laughed. "Relax, you're armed." I glanced at my pocket knife. Cheap folding, the kind meant for cutting packaging, not saving your life. "Terrifying," I said. We passed a small post marked PHL 10. He slapped it like a milestone. 1 mile, he said. "Easy." I nodded, but my attention snagged on a smell drifting through the air. Not rot, not skunk, not anything I could name. It reminded me of wet pennies and old leaves, metallic and faint. It came and went like the woods were breathing it. The trail narrowed after that. The trees crowded closer. The ground grew softer, muffled by moss. The air felt heavier, like sound didn't travel the same way here. That was when the first feeling hit me. Not fear exactly, awareness. The sense of being observed, subtle but insistent. Like the space behind me had changed. I looked back. Nothing. Just the trail curving away, empty and green. "You good?" my friend asked without turning. "Yeah," I lied. "Thought I saw something." He smirked, face in the trees. "Shut up." We kept walking. 10 minutes later, I saw it again. Not a full figure, just something my brain insisted on interpreting as a face. Pale and flat between two trunks half hidden by ferns. Too smooth, too uniform. I stopped without meaning to. My friend took a few steps, then turned. "What now?" "Do you see that?" I asked, pointing. He squinted. "See what?" "Right there." He walked closer, casual, like he was approaching an exhibit. "It's bark." "That's not bark," I said, and hated how unsure I sounded. As he got closer, the face vanished, not by moving, but by ceasing to be a face at all. "Just trees and shadow," he grinned. "Told you." My heart kept racing anyway. We reached a clearing a few minutes later. Sunlight pooled there, bright and warm. A fallen log sat near the center, and the grass looked strangely untouched. A tilted marker read PHL 18. My friend dropped his pack. "Break time." I hesitated, scanning the tree line. Nothing moved, no faces, no shadows. I sat. We drank water, split a granola bar, and for a moment the world felt normal again. I almost laughed at myself for being tense. My friend started in on the legend again: settlers, a lost family, a storm, but stopped mid-sentence. Everything went silent, not quiet, silent. No birds, no wind, no insects. The absence pressed in on my ears. Then came the scream. Ugly, raw, like someone in pain. Another scream followed, closer. My friend stood up. "That's a person." "Don't," I said, grabbing him. Another scream right at the edge of the clearing. Something moved in the trees. Wrong, low, fast. My friend stepped back. It hit him. The impact knocked him flat. I saw it then, just enough. Long limbs, a narrow torso, a head that didn't sit right, eyes that didn't blink, it didn't rush. It leaned over him, considering. Then it opened its mouth. "Help me." It was my friend's voice, but it wasn't coming from him. I lunged, pulled him, swung my knife without thinking. The blade bit into something wet and resistant. The creature turned toward me, curious. Then it moved. It hit me hard, knocked the breath from my lungs, raked my arm with something sharp, and was gone again in a blink, back to my friend. It leaned close and whispered in his own voice. "Stop." He froze just long enough. Then it dragged him into the trees. The clearing was empty. Then his voice came again, calling my name, soft, friendly. I ran. The woods stayed silent as I fled. Every so often his voice followed, laughing, crying, once sounding like my mom. I didn't stop until I burst into the gravel lot. People were there. Normal people. Someone called 911. As search teams organized, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. "Why did you leave HIM?" An audio message tried to play. I didn't listen. I didn't have to, because my friend's voice whispered from my phone anyway. "Come back." I threw it away and looked back at the trees. For just a second I saw a face, and it smiled. I thought I was being nice. I really did. I thought I was being the kind of boyfriend people brag about online, the one who notices when his partner is running on fumes and doesn't just say, "That sucks," but actually does something about it. I thought I was being thoughtful. I thought I was being safe. It was a mistake, all of it. And I own that decision in a way I can't explain without sounding like I'm trying to punish myself. I'm not. I just know exactly where the first domino fell, and it was my hand that pushed it. She'd been stressed for weeks. She worked retail, and because it was the holidays, her managers had her on the schedule like she was a machine that didn't need sleep. 6 days a week, 12 hours a day, sometimes longer if someone called out. She'd come home with that particular kind of exhaustion you can't cure with one good night's sleep. Her feet would ache so badly she'd peel off her socks like they were glued on. She'd sit on the edge of the bed staring into nothing and forget she was holding her phone. Some nights she'd start crying for no obvious reason, not dramatic sobbing, just tears that showed up like her body was leaking stress. She complained to me constantly about her feet, her head, her back. She'd say the same phrases over and over because she didn't have the energy to find new ones. "I'm dead. I feel sick. My brain is mush." At first I tried to be helpful in the normal ways, taking over chores, cooking, making her tea, but it wasn't touching the deeper thing. She needed a break that felt like a break, something that told her she was allowed to stop. That was when the idea hatched, a spa day, a real one, not a half-hearted gift card tossed into a stocking, not go soak your feet in the tub. Something exclusive, something that made her feel like someone was taking care of her for once. I know how that sounds. Like I'm painting myself as a hero. I'm not. I just remember the exact mindset. I remember feeling proud of myself before anything went wrong, like I was about to fix something in her life with one grand gesture. That pride makes me feel sick now. I went online and started searching. For the first half hour, I found the usual junk. Sketchy-looking places in strip malls with blurry photos and too many exclamation points. Packages advertised with names like Royal Touch Deluxe and Hot Stone Heaven, with prices that looked more like a coupon than a service. I kept picturing her in some dim room with a towel that smelled like bleach and a stranger digging their thumbs into her shoulders, while bad music played through a speaker that crackled. She deserved better than that. At least that's what I told myself. Then I found it, Surin Tide. Even the name looked expensive. It had that accent over the U, which made it feel foreign and upscale in a way I can't fully explain. The website loaded fast. The design was sleek. Black background, crisp white text, minimal photos. The pictures that were there looked professional. A candle-lit waiting room. A hallway with soft lighting, white robes folded neatly. A glass of water with sliced citrus on a dark wooden tray. No weird stock photo smiles. No giant neon open sign. There was also a long, almost poetic block of text at the top of the page. I remember reading it twice because it was so over the top it almost felt like satire. It is our belief that all stress and aches are brought on by darkness held within the soul and mind of a previously pure vessel. We here at Surin Tide uphold our beliefs to the highest degree and can assure that you will leave our location with a newfound sense of life and liberty. Our professional team of employees will see to it that not only do you leave happy, you leave satisfied. My eyes got to that last word and I actually said out loud to my empty room, "Wow, I really hope this isn't some kind of happy ending thing." But everything else looked legitimate. There was an address on the site. There were hours. There were glossy photos of a building exterior that looked like a renovated old house turned into a boutique wellness place. There were reviews that seemed normal enough, though I didn't look too hard at the time. I didn't see anything obviously criminal, nothing that screamed scam. What did seem criminal was the price. The full premium package was $450. And that wasn't even counting whatever taxes and service fees they would tack on. But in my head, expensive meant best. I wish I could say I'm smarter than that now, but the truth is I wanted it to be impressive. I wanted to hand her something that made her eyes widen. I wanted her to feel like she mattered enough for me to spend a stupid amount of money on her comfort. So I called. A stern female voice picked up on the second ring. "Surin Thai," she said, crisp and polished. "Where we de-stress best. How can I help you?" Yeah, hi," I said. "I was calling about your premium package." There was a pause and I could hear the faint click-clack of keys like she was typing while she listened. "Ah, yes," she said. "Donovan, I presume. I see you visited our site recently. Did you have questions about pricing or would you like to book an appointment?" It took me a second to process what she'd said, because the way she said my name was so casual, like she was confirming an order. "Wait," I said. "Did you say Donovan?" "Yes, sir," she replied without missing a beat. "We noticed you visited our website earlier. We try our best to attract new customers here." She said it like it was normal for a spa to know the first name of a random person browsing. My stomach tightened, and I almost asked how exactly she knew. But she cut me off in a smooth, almost elegant way, like she'd already predicted the question and decided it wasn't worth answering. "Did you have a specific day and time in mind for the appointment?" I hesitated. "This appointment is for my girlfriend. Let me just check what days she has available." I pulled up my girlfriend's schedule because we shared a calendar to keep track of her shifts. It was a bleak sea of long blocks labeled work, work, work. Her one day off was coming up. Before I could even find the day, the woman spoke again like she could see what I was doing. "Oh, I will inform you," she said. "We are open on Christmas Day." It landed in my head like a bright, perfect solution. Christmas was the one day her store should be closed. It would be the rare day she could actually relax. I didn't think about how strange it was that a boutique spa would be open on Christmas. I didn't think about why the woman sounded pleased to offer it. "Really?" I said. "That's perfect. Let's do how about 7 p.m. Christmas Day?" More clicking on her end. "All right," she said, drawn out slightly like she was savoring it. 7 p.m. Christmas it is." That was when my girlfriend burst through my bedroom door, already crying, talking through sobs about her day, about customers and managers and the feeling of being trapped. She was still wearing her uniform. Her cheeks were red from cold and frustration. Her makeup had smudged at the corners of her eyes. Out of instinct, I ended the call too quickly. I didn't even say goodbye. I just hit the button and tossed my phone aside, rushing to her. "I hate it there," she kept saying, fighting with her heels like they were trying to keep her hostage. "I hate it, I hate it, I hate it." I pulled her into a hug and rubbed the back of her head the way she liked. I told her the comforting things you say when you mean them, but you don't know how to fix the problem. "I know, honey. You don't have to stay much longer. I promise we'll find you a new job." "Promise?" she asked, voice small, eyes wet. "Yes," I said, "I promise." I remember feeling a warm glow in my chest as she clung to me, like my words had actually built a bridge out of her exhaustion. I remember thinking about the spa appointment and feeling satisfied with myself, like I had planted a surprise that would bloom into relief. We spent the rest of the night on the couch. She picked Mindhunter because she liked the way it made her forget her own life for a while. We ate extra buttered popcorn. Halfway through the first episode, her breathing slowed and she fell asleep with her head in my lap. She snored softly, the tiniest sound, and her body twitched a couple times like she was dropping into a deep sleep. I waited a few minutes before gently shifting her head onto a pillow. I didn't want to wake her. She deserved to sleep. I decided to do some work on my computer while she rested. When I opened my laptop, the first thing I saw was the email. A receipt. Digital. Clean. From Surin Thai. At first I thought it was just a confirmation, something that said payment would be collected later. But then I read the line item, paid in full. I frowned and checked my bank app. My balance was down $481, $50, not the $450 they'd advertised. They de-added something, a fee, a tax, something called processing. It didn't matter. The point was that the money was gone. The problem was I had never given them my card number. I sat there staring at the screen, feeling that slow creep of irritation and unease. It was the kind of feeling you get when you realize you've been fooled, except it was layered with confusion because I couldn't even see how. I called the number back. Dial tone, not voicemail, not we're closed. Just the harsh, empty sound of a line that didn't connect. I tried again. Same thing. I tried a third time, slower, watching the screen. Same thing. My first thought was scam. That I'd been stupid, that I'd handed my girlfriend's hope to some fake business, and now I was out nearly $500. But I didn't understand how they'd taken the money. I went to bed anyway because I didn't want to wake her and ruin the rare peace on her face. I told myself I'd deal with it in the morning. I fell asleep eventually with the sick feeling still sitting in my stomach. When I woke up, she was gone. There was a note on her pillow, written in her handwriting, cheerful and casual, with a heart and a smiley face. Got called into work, see you soon. For about 2 seconds that made sense. Then my brain caught up to reality. It was Christmas. Her store was closed on Christmas. She decomplained about it enough. She'd always said the one good thing about retail was that at least Christmas Day was off. Panic hit me so fast it felt like being pushed underwater. I threw the blankets off and ran through the house. I called her name. The living room was untouched. The gifts under the tree sat exactly as they had the night before. Her coat wasn't on the hook. Her shoes weren't by the door. Then I saw the front door. The frame was splintered. The knob hung crooked, torn half out of the wood. The door itself was pushed slightly inward like someone had kicked it and then left it half open. My chest tightened so hard I could barely breathe. I called 911 with shaking hands, words tripping over each other. I told them my girlfriend was gone and my door had been kicked in. The response was not what I expected. It wasn't urgency. It wasn't immediate action. The dispatcher was calm to the point of sounding bored. She asked me her age. I told her. She asked if my girlfriend had a history of leaving. I said no. She asked if we'd had a fight. I said no. I told her again about the door. When the police arrived, they looked at the broken frame, nodded, took notes, and then told me something that made my head spin. They said she was an adult, that adults could leave, that unless there was evidence of a crime or she'd been missing for a certain amount of time, there wasn't much they could do. They said 24 to 48 hours. They said it like they were reciting policy. I tried to argue. I pointed at the damaged door. I told them she'd never leave without texting. They exchanged looks like they were humoring me, not hearing me. I didn't connect it to Surin Tide yet. Not until my phone buzzed. An automated reminder popped up like it was normal. Don't forget, spa appointment. 12/25/25/7:00 MEST. My hands clenched so hard my nails dug into my palms. Those motherfuckers. I ran back to my laptop, ready to screenshot everything. The website, the address, the phone number, the weird poetic text. I wanted evidence. I wanted something to shove in the police's face so they couldn't dismiss me like a paranoid boyfriend. The link was dead. A gray page, 404, error, no cached version, no easy trace, like the entire business had never existed. That was when the dread turned heavier than panic. Panic is loud and sharp. Dread is slow. It settles in your bones. The house felt wrong. Christmas decorations looked like props. The tree lights blinked cheerfully in a room that suddenly felt like it had been staged for an audience that didn't care what I wanted. The silence was unbearable. Every time the heater clicked on, my body jerked like it was a knock at the door. I called her again and again until my phone warned me I was dialing too fast. I called her friends. I called her sister. No one had heard from her. Everyone kept saying the same phrases. I'm sure she's okay. Maybe her phone died. Maybe she needed space. None of those explanations fit the broken doorframe. I called the police again. I told them about Surin Tide. I told them the website was gone. I told them the money had been taken. I told them her note didn't make sense. They sounded irritated, like I was ruining their holiday. One officer actually told me with a shrug that sometimes people just leave. That holidays can make relationships complicated. He suggested she might have gone for fresh air. What? Fresh air. I wanted to hit him. I didn't. I just stared because I realized in that moment that no one was coming to save her because they didn't understand what I was telling them. And because my story sounded messy and emotional and too weird to be treated like an emergency. By December 26th, I was running on almost no sleep. The police finally got more involved, but it didn't feel like help. It felt like punishment. Like they were irritated I had forced them to do work when they'd rather be home. They came into my house and treated it like a search scene, but their energy wasn't focused. It was annoying. They opened gifts under the tree, unwrapped them, rummaged through drawers, flipped couch cushions, pulled out boxes from closets. One of them opened my fridge, took a soda, and didn't even ask. Another wandered into my pantry and made a comment about my snacks like he was in a convenience store. I was too exhausted to argue. My grief had turned me hollow. I handed them my laptop, gave them permission to go through my email and history. I thought maybe they'd find something I'd missed, a trace, a link. They didn't find anything they told me about. When they left, I crawled upstairs and collapsed face first into my pillow, crying the kind of quiet crying where you don't make noise because you don't have any left. I fell asleep without meaning to, like my body had finally overridden my mind. I woke up to pounding at the front door. My whole body surged with hope so sharp it hurt. For a split second I thought she was back, that everything had been a nightmare. Then the pounding stopped. I heard fast footsteps on the porch retreating. I stumbled down the stairs, heart racing, and looked through the peephole. A black van was pulling away, tires spitting gravel. It had tinted windows and those cheap donut tires that look like they belong on a spare. Before it disappeared, I caught one detail that made my skin go cold. There was no license plate. I yanked the door open. And my hope died in a way I didn't know hope could die. In the middle of my porch sat a wheelchair. In it was my girlfriend. She wore a white robe like she just stepped out of a spa. A towel was wrapped around her hair. Her hands rested limp in her lap. Her head tilted slightly to one side like a doll placed carelessly on a shelf. She wasn't bleeding. She wasn't bruised. She didn't look beat. She looked empty. Her eyes were open but glazed, not focusing. Her mouth hung slightly open like her face had forgotten how to close it. I said her name and the sound came out cracked and helpless. I dropped to my knees beside her, hands hovering because I didn't know what touching her would do. When I finally stroked her cheek, her skin felt strangely smooth, almost too smooth, like it had been scrubbed down past what skin should feel like. Warm, but not alive in the way I recognized. Her complexion was perfect. Not makeup perfect. Not good lighting perfect. Perfect like someone had erased every mark that proved she'd lived. Her blackheads were gone. Tiny blemishes I'd seen up close were gone. Even the small unevenness around her chin that she'd hated was gone. And her birthmark was gone. The little mark near her collarbone that she used to joke was God's proof of authenticity. I stared at the spot where it should have been and felt something in my chest twist, because that mark had been part of her. It had been there in every photo. It didn't just disappear. The only visible mark on her was a bandage on her forehead, slightly stained with dried blood. I said her name again. Louder, then louder. Her eyes rolled toward me slowly like the movement took effort, and for a moment I thought she recognized me. Then her gaze drifted past my shoulder, unfocused, like I was just another object in the room. I started crying loud now, the kind of crying you can't control. I shook the handles of the wheelchair gently at first, then harder, begging her to respond. She made noises, grunts, heavy breathing. A low sound like her throat was trying to form words and failing. It was like her mind had been pulled out and put back wrong. As I shook her, something slid out from inside her robe and fell onto my porch with a soft plastic slap. A laminated card. The top of it had the SD logo in bold lettering. Clean, professional, like a membership pass. My hands trembled as I picked it up. I didn't want to read it because reading it would make it real in a way I couldn't undo. But I read it. Session complete. Thank you for choosing Surin Tide and happy holidays from our family to yours. That was it. Like a receipt, like customer service. I sat on my porch with the card in my hand and my girlfriend in front of me, staring into nothing, and I realized something that made me feel colder than fear. I had bought this. Not just with money, with my belief, with my decision to dial that number, with my choice to ignore the small wrongness. How they knew my name, how they guided me, how the payment happened without permission, how the website vanished like it had never existed. And the worst part, the part that still makes me sick, wasn't the card. It was the simple, crushing thought that landed in my head as I looked at her empty eyes and that spotless skin and the missing birthmark. Whatever Surin Tide did, it wasn't about pampering. It was about removal, not just stress. Not just darkness. Something else, something human, something that made her her. And it took it so cleanly that it left no marks except a neat little bandage on her forehead, as if the place where she used to be could be covered up and forgotten. I called 911 again. I screamed. I demanded an ambulance. I told them she'd been kidnapped. I told them she'd been returned in a wheelchair. This time they came fast because now there was something they could see. But even as the paramedics lifted her and the police asked me questions, I couldn't stop staring down my driveway, half expecting that black van to come back, half expecting my phone to ring, half expecting that stern female voice to say my name again like it was nothing. Because deep down, beneath all the shock and grief, one thought kept repeating in my head, simple and unbearable. If they could take her from my house and return her like a completed session, then they could do it again. And the only reason they hadn't was because they'd already gotten what they came for. Not her money, not mine, something else. Something I had gifted them without knowing it. The year was 1995, February 27. I remember the date because it was written on the corner of my mom's calendar in thick black marker, the kind she used for everything important after my dad died. It wasn't meant to be a memorial date. It was just the day she circled for a Boy Scout meeting and a dentist appointment, and whatever else families keep moving through even when something in the house has gone missing. My name is Sam. I had 3 siblings back then, and I was raised by both my parents until early January. That's when my dad passed away. It was sudden enough that no one had practiced saying the words out loud. After the funeral, after people stopped dropping off casseroles, after the house stopped ringing with phone calls, my mom became the one who took me to my Boy Scout meets. My dad used to do it. He took it seriously too, in a quiet way. Not the loud, be a man type. More like he wanted me to learn how to do things for myself, how to pay attention to small details, how to be calm when something went wrong. He had given me a large plastic lantern for my birthday the year before. It wasn't fancy, just a bulky thing with a clear body and a switch that sometimes stuck. But my dad had made a whole thing of it, holding it out like it was a gift from a survival expert. Light is comfort, he said. Light tells your brain you're not trapped. I didn't realize how much that sentence would haunt me until later. After he died, I didn't want to be in the house. The house felt different without him. The rooms were the same, but the way air moved through them felt wrong, like the place was constantly listening for him to come down the hall. Everyone in my family grieved differently. My mom kept busy. My siblings made noise and then went quiet. I hovered somewhere in the middle. I acted responsible because it made adults praise me, and praise was easier to hold than grief. Jason was my good friend. We weren't the kind of friends who said deep things to each other. We were the kind who joked and dared each other to do stupid stuff and acted brave even when we were. He lived a few miles away near a big stretch of woods behind his parents' house. His family was the type that let him roam as long as he came back for dinner. He'd been talking for weeks about camping out there. Not in a campground with other families and bathrooms. He meant real woods, a cheap tent, a fire if we could make one. That feeling of being away from everything. I said yes because I wanted a night where my brain wasn't stuck on the fact that my dad was gone. I wanted the normal kind of feel. The kind you can laugh off. Not the kind that sits in your chest like a stone. We planned it the way kids plan things when they've watched enough movies to think they know what they're doing. A cheap tent, 2 sleeping bags, 2 gallons of water, some dry food, hot dogs, a flashlight, and that lantern my dad gave me. The lantern felt like the only thing that made it real. Like if I had that, I wasn't pretending. We headed out late morning. The air still had winter in it, but the snow had mostly melted into soft, cold ground. The woods were damp. The kind of damp that makes your shoes darken around the edges and makes everything smell like earth and old leaves. Jason's parents knew we were out there. They thought it was the usual teenage thing. They knew the general area. They told us not to go too far. They weren't worried. I don't blame them for that. Nothing had ever happened out there besides kids getting lost for an hour and stumbling back embarrassed. We hiked a few miles in, deeper than we needed to. It wasn't because we were tough. It was because every time we thought we'd found a spot, Jason would say, "Nah, keep going, there's a better one," like better meant farther from adults. Eventually, I stopped and dropped my bag. "This is as good a spot as any," I said. Jason looked relieved in a way he tried to hide, like he didn't want to admit the weight had been getting to him. He wiped sweat off his forehead and nodded like he was making a serious decision. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, this works." We set up camp in a small flat area surrounded by trees, far enough from the main trail that you couldn't see it unless you were looking. The ground was covered with pine needles and damp leaves. We cleared away sticks and rocks, arguing about where the tent should go. Jason insisted it should face the open space between 2 trees. I wanted it closer to a thick trunk so the wind wouldn't hit it as hard. In the end, we compromised in the way kids always do. We put it where it was easiest. By the time the tent was up, it looked like a little pale lump in a sea of brown and green. We set our stuff inside, stacked food in a bag, and placed the lantern near the entrance. I remember feeling a little proud, like we had created something in the woods that belonged to us. The first day was normal. That's important. It wasn't doom from the start. It wasn't immediate horror. If anything had felt obviously wrong right away, we would have left. We weren't fearless. We were just young. We wandered around near the campsite, exploring, hiking through dense forest, throwing pine cones at each other, talking about nothing important. The woods felt huge but familiar, like the kind of place you can get lost in and still trust that the world is basically safe. Late in the day, around dusk, we found a dried-up creek bed. It was more of a shallow, winding groove in the earth, lined with stones and dark mud. It looked like it had been a real creek once, but now it was just a path for runoff and old water marks. Jason got excited immediately. "Follow it," he said. "It'll lead somewhere." I didn't care where it led. The light was fading and I didn't want to be out far when it got dark. But Jason had that look, the one that meant he decided we were having an adventure whether I wanted one or not. So we followed it. The creek bed wound through the trees, sometimes narrowing into a tight channel, sometimes opening up. The air cooled as the sun dropped lower and the woods began to change sound. Birds shifted, distant, uncertain. The little noises of day faded. I remember thinking we should head back soon. Then the creek bed opened into a large clearing. It wasn't just a gap in the trees. It was a wide open space, circular enough that it felt unnatural. The grass was thin and patchy, and the ground looked darker in the center, like it held water sometimes. Tree line ringed it like a wall. Dusk light made the clearing look pale and exposed. From the moment I stepped out of the woods and into that open space, I felt uneasy. Not panic, not terror, just that faint pressure in the belly you get when you realize you've walked into a place where you shouldn't be loud. We walked toward the middle, still following the creek bed. The creek ended in a small bog, a dark muddy patch with shallow water and reeds. The mud looked thick, like it could swallow shoes if you stepped wrong. My unease got stronger the closer we got to that bog. It wasn't the bog itself. It was the feeling that the clearing was watching us. Not a person watching. The place. Like it had a sense of itself and we were something it hadn't invited. Jason didn't notice. Or he did and didn't care. He climbed down into the creek bed, crouching and digging around in the mud like a kid looking for buried treasure. He kept picking up rocks, turning them, tossing them aside. "Look at this one," he said, holding up a stone like it was special. I barely glanced. I stood at the top of a small slope leading down into the creek bed and scanned the tree line. I couldn't fight the feeling that something was there, just beyond the edge, just behind the trunks. My eyes moved around the perimeter, slow and careful. The only thing I saw was a few birds suddenly taking off from the far left, a burst of wings and dark shapes lifting into the air like they'd been startled. It could have been a fox, a deer, something small, but the way they fled made my throat tighten. I told myself it was nothing. Jason called my name again and waved me over. He was grinning, holding something in his muddy hands. "Found something," he said. I climbed down and came closer. What he held didn't look like a rock. It was a ring made of small, skinny sticks, bent into a circle and wrapped around each other. In the middle of the ring was a little shape made of the same sticks, a small figure that I can only describe as a character, like a crude person. No detail, just limbs and a head suggested by the way the twigs crossed. It wasn't something you'd naturally find in mud. It was made. It looked old but not rotted, like someone had built it and the bog had preserved it. Jason turned it in his hands, fascinated. "This is sick," he said, "like a witch thing." I didn't like it. The moment I saw it, the unease in my stomach sharpened into something colder. It felt like we'd picked up something that was meant to stay where it was. "Put it back," I said. Jason laughed. "Why?" "Because it's creepy," I said. "Because it's someone else." "It's the woods," he replied. "It's not someone else." But even as he said it, he looked around the clearing and his grin faded just a little. Like he'd finally heard the silence too. He kept it anyway. He wiped it off with his sleeve, tucked it into his pocket like a souvenir, and we headed back before the light fully died. I kept glancing behind us on the way out, expecting to see someone standing at the tree line. I didn't see anyone, just trees. We got back to camp as the last of the daylight faded. We ate hot dogs over a small fire that barely stayed alive because the wood was damp. Smoke hung low and made our eyes sting. We joked, we complained, we tried to make the night feel normal. When it got fully dark, the woods around the tent became a wall. The fire shrank into coals, shadows pressed in. We shut the tent flap and crawled into our sleeping bags. Jason fell asleep fast. I didn't. I lay there listening to the night sounds, trying to convince myself I was safe. My dad's lantern sat near the entrance, turned off. I could feel it there like a comfort object. I wanted to turn it on just to see the light fill the tent, but I didn't want to waste batteries. It was stupid to worry about batteries. I know that now. But at 12, no, I wasn't 12 yet then, I was older, but I still thought like a kid in some ways. I was still trying to do things the right way, scout way, prepared way. Eventually, I fell asleep. The real story starts that first night. I woke up suddenly with dread in my chest, not from a sound, not from a dream I could remember. Just that instant waking where your body already believes something is wrong before your mind catches up. My stomach felt sour. My mouth was dry. The air in the tent felt thick, like it had been breathed too many times. I rolled over to look for Jason. I expected to see him, a sleeping bag lump beside me, maybe his face half visible in the dim light. He wasn't there. At first, my mind tried to make it simple. Bathroom. Maybe he went outside to pee. Maybe he got up to check the fire, but it had been cold. Jason hated the cold. He wouldn't leave the sleeping bag unless he had to. I sat up, heart beating harder. The tent was small. There wasn't room for him to be hidden. His sleeping bag was still there, partially unzipped, like someone had slid out of it carefully. The woods outside were making noise, but not the right kind. It took me a few seconds to realize what was wrong. It wasn't crickets and cicadas like I expected. The sound was too smooth, too steady, almost melodic, like a low hum. It felt like it wasn't coming from outside. It felt like it was inside my head. I don't know why I did what I did next. It wasn't logical, but I remember moving like I was being pulled by instinct. I leaned forward and pressed my ear close to the ground of the tent. The hum got louder, louder and louder until it felt like it was vibrating through my skull. By the time my ear was nearly against the earth beneath the tent, it was almost deafening. A thick sound that made my teeth ache and my ears ring. It wasn't just noise. It felt like pressure, like the air wanted to split. Then, in an instant, it stopped. Complete silence. So silent my ears rang even more, like they were trying to fill the absence. My breathing sounded too loud. The fabric of the tent creaked softly as I shifted, and that tiny sound felt obscene. I unzipped the tent and stepped out. The night was darker than it should have been. Clouds covered the sky. The trees were tall black shapes. I could barely see the outline of our campsite. Jason. I whispered, no answer. Then I noticed a pool of light about 100 feet away. It wasn't the moon. It wasn't a flashlight beam sweeping. It was a steady circle, pale and contained, as if someone had set down a lantern in the woods and left it lit. My stomach dropped. I walked toward it slowly, trying not to make noise, trying not to panic. My shoes pressed into damp leaves. The light didn't move. It waited. As I got closer, I realized it was our lantern. My dad's lantern. It stood upright on the ground, turned on, throwing that familiar plastic-filtered light in a wide circle. And in the center of that circle stood Jason. He was upright, staring into the darkness beyond the light. His posture was stiff, like someone who had forgotten how to relax. His arms hung at his sides. His face looked blank in the lantern glow, eyes wide but unfocused, like he'd seen something too big to fit in his head. "Jason," I said, louder now, "what are you doing?" He didn't turn at first. He just stood there, breathing shallowly. Then he spoke, and the words made no sense. "A man," he whispered, "a man with too many teeth." I felt cold spread through my chest. "What are you talking about?" I asked, and my voice sounded wrong, thin and young. Jason blinked slowly, like he was waking up from a trance. His eyes shifted toward me, then away, then back again like he couldn't hold focus. "I saw him," he said, barely above a breath. He smiled, and it was too many. I grabbed his hand. His skin was cold and damp. He didn't resist, but he didn't help either. I guided him back toward the tent, half dragging, half leading, my own legs shaky. Behind us, the pool of lantern light followed like a bubble we were carrying. When we got close enough to see the tent properly, my stomach flipped. Our stuff was moved, all of it. The water jugs, the food bag, the flashlight, even the small pile of firewood we'd gathered. It was arranged outside the tent in a kind of semicircle around the entrance, like someone had set up a display. Not thrown, not rummaged, placed, like hands had done it. I stopped a few feet away, not wanting to step closer. Every part of my body screamed that the tent was no longer ours, that it was a trap now, a mouth waiting to close. Jason stood beside me, breathing hard, his hand still in mine. He seemed more awake now, but his eyes were fixed on the tent with dread. Then I noticed something else, a shape inside. The tent wall bulged slightly as if something was pushing against it from within. Not a person's full body, something lower, something that moved slowly like it was repositioning itself. I started backing away without meaning to. Jason's grip tightened. "Sam," he whispered. I reached down and clicked off the lantern. Instant darkness. The sudden loss of light made my head swim. For a second I was blind, hearing only our breathing and the distant, wrong hush of the woods. Then my eyes adjusted enough to see the faint outline of the trail direction back toward Jason's house. I took his hand again and we started moving away from the tent, slow at first, then faster. I didn't want to run yet. Running felt like admitting we were being hunted. We walked with our backs to the tent, trying to be quiet. Each step felt like it took too long. The woods pressed in. The silence made every leaf crunch sound like a shout. Then I heard it, the sound that stopped me dead, a sharp zip. The tent unzipping fast, like someone ripping it open in one quick motion. We bolted. No thinking, no planning, just pure panic. We ran in the direction of the house lights we knew existed miles away. My lungs burned immediately. Branches slapped my face. Leaves and twigs scraped my arms. I could hear Jason running beside me, his breath ragged. And behind us there was another sound. A third set of movement. Not Jason's, not mine. Something coming fast, closing distance, not stumbling, not crashing blindly like a deer. It moved with purpose, with speed that didn't match the terrain. My mind screamed one idea over and over: don't let it catch you in the dark. I didn't know what it was, I still don't. But my body knew to fear it like it had always existed. I let go of Jason's hand and veered left. I don't know why. Maybe I thought splitting up would confuse it. Maybe it was instinct, selfish and desperate. Maybe I just tripped and corrected wrong and it became a choice. Jason. I shouted once, and then the word tore apart in my throat because I couldn't afford to slow down. I ran harder, forcing my legs to move beyond what they should have been able to do. My heart hammered, my stomach lurched. The woods became a blur of dark trunks and tangled branches. Then I saw it. A faint glow through the trees, Jason's house. Not close, but close enough to be real, close enough to aim for. I stumbled toward it like it was the only thing holding the world together. My feet slipped in mud. I nearly fell twice. I caught myself on a tree trunk and kept going. When I reached the back door, I hit it with both fists. I didn't knock. I pounded like I was trying to break through the wood. I was crying without realizing it, making small, desperate sounds that didn't feel like mine. A light clicked on inside. Footsteps. A voice. Jason's mom or dad, I couldn't tell. The door opened and warm yellow light spilled out. Jason's parents stood there in pajamas, face confused and alarmed. The moment they saw my face, their confusion turned into fear. What happened? They said. I tried to speak and couldn't at first. I was shaking so hard my teeth clicked. My throat felt raw. Jason, I managed. Jason something, he was. They grabbed my shoulders, pulled me inside, asked again, louder. I forced the story out in broken pieces. The tent, the lantern, Jason standing there, the man with too many teeth. The stuff moved, the zipper, running, something behind us. When they asked where Jason was, I told them the truth. I don't know, I said, and the shame in that sentence still makes me feel sick. I don't know where he is. Jason's dad swore and reached for the phone. Jason's mom pulled a blanket around my shoulders and kept saying my name like she was trying to anchor me to reality. They called the police. They called neighbors. They grabbed flashlights and tried to organize a search before dawn, but the woods were too dangerous in the dark. They sent people to the trailhead. They checked the roads. They shouted Jason's name into the trees. No answer. When morning came, police arrived and a full search started. Not just a few people wandering. Real teams. Dogs, volunteers. They combed the area for days. They found our campsite, or what was left of it. They found the tent torn open. They found the semicircle arrangement of our supplies still placed like an offering. They found footprints in the mud that they said could have been ours, could have been anyone's because the ground was disturbed and wet and full of overlapping tracks. They found a dried-up creek bed leading to a clearing. They found the bog. They found the strange little ring of sticks and the crude figure in the center, half sunk in mud like it had been waiting to be noticed again. And days later, they found Jason's t-shirt. Just the t-shirt he had been wearing when we left. It was crumpled on the ground a ways from the creek bed like it had been tossed there. No blood, no torn fabric, no other clothing, no shoes, no body, nothing else. People asked me questions for weeks. Police, parents, neighbors. They asked the same things in different ways, hoping the shape of my answer would change. Did Jason run away? Did you fight? Did you take something? Were you drinking? Were you lying? The more I told the story, the less real it sounded. It felt like my mouth was betraying me. Like every detail I spoke aloud became more ridiculous to anyone who hadn't heard that hum, who hadn't seen a friend standing in a pool of light like his mind had been peeled open. They never found Jason. Time moved on because it always does, even when it shouldn't. People stopped searching. Posters faded. Conversations quieted. Life swallowed the space where Jason used to be. But for me, that night never ended cleanly. I still think about it every few months, like my brain checks the wound to see if it's healed. It never is. Sometimes I remember the clearing and how the tree line looked like a wall. Sometimes I remember the way the lantern light made Jason's face look pale and wrong. Sometimes I remember his words, the way he said, "too many teeth," like he'd seen something that made sense only in a nightmare. And sometimes when I'm lying in bed and the house is quiet, I remember that hum. Not the sound itself, but the way it felt inside my skull. The way it grew louder the closer I got to the ground, like something beneath us was alive and listening. I tell myself now that grief can distort perception. That fear can make you interpret shadows as faces and silence as intention. That two scared kids in the woods can become a story that grows teeth in memory. But then I remember something small and practical, something my brain keeps returning to because it's harder to dismiss. We went asleep in that tent with our supplies inside, and I woke up to the sound of something that didn't belong. I woke up and Jason was gone, and our things were arranged outside our tent like someone had taken time with them, like someone wanted us to see. Whatever happened out there didn't feel random. It didn't feel like an accident. It felt like we stepped into a place that already knew we were coming. And when Jason was taken, if that's what happened, it didn't feel like a struggle. It felt like someone removing something they had finally decided to claim. If you're still here, it means these stories didn't just pass through you. They stayed. Every story you heard tonight was real. Real people, real moments. And in every one of them, something went wrong or almost did. If you want to keep exploring the stories that don't let go so easily, subscribe to Unsaid Hours. Because there are more stories waiting. And not all of them end before it's too late.